All right. I'm sitting here with. You guys state your name. So if you could go ahead and state your name.
Douglas North.
All right. And we are at his house in Kokomo, Indiana, on May 11th, 2014. So, Papa, where and when were you born?
I was born in Lafayette, Indiana in June 13th, 1925.
And who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My father was Junius North. He was an electrician. My mother was a housewife, Martha Ellis Knott.
And
She was half Susquehanna Indian.
and who were your siblings, names, genders?
I had two stepsisters from my father's previous marriage. I had one full-blooded sister, Evelyn. That's it.
Okay. And what were you doing before you entered the service?
Going to school, high school. I went in right out of high school.
So which branch of the military did you serve in?
United States Navy Reserve.
And you enlisted?
Enlisted.
Why did you choose the Navy?
I had a stepbrother who was already in the Navy, and the popular choice, I think, was Navy rather than going back into the Army, into the infantry.
So what happened after you enlisted?
What do you mean, what happened?
What was where did you go to training?
I went to Great Lakes Naval Training Station, north of Chicago, for boot camp, which was 8 weeks long. And then I went to Hospital Corps School in Bainbridge, Maryland, for training as a hospital apprentice.
Do you recall anything specific about your training or instructors or?
Oh, many, many things, but that's kind of an endless story. It's I went to Corps School. From Corps School I went to Chelsea Naval Hospital in Boston for duty. I was transferred from there to Bainbridge, Maryland, to the Amphibious Forces, and trained for independent duty on an LST.
What's an LST?
A landing ship tank.
Okay. So how did you adapt to military life from being a civilian?
Well, all the men were in the military. There wasn't any adapting hardly. I mean, it was World War II, and it was just the thing to do. I mean, very strong patriotic vein in the country, and the draft, of course.
So
I didn't have any trouble adapting.
Okay. So where did you serve?
Picked up a ship in Evansville, Indiana, and then went down to Mississippi to a shakedown cruise off the coast of Florida, and in the Chesapeake Bay, and then through the Panama Canal to the South Pacific, and wound up in the South Pacific for the rest of the war.
All right. What were some of the memories you have from serving in the South Pacific?
Well, lots of camaraderie, lots of waiting for the next assignment. There's a lot of waiting in the military. Lots of lines and lots of waiting. And we went from Seattle, we island hopped across the Pacific, and LST runs at flank speed at about 8 knots an hour. So it's a very slow boat to China. And we sometimes hauled cargo, and sometimes we hauled tanks, and we have an LCI strapped on the top deck because they were not ocean going. They were used extensively in invasions, but they had to be carted over. And sometimes we had a component of Army. Toward the end of the war, our ship was carrying mostly repatriated Koreans that the Japanese had taken to Truk, which was the Japanese stronghold in the Pacific. And probably the most memorable, we took 150 Japanese who had surrendered on Truk back to Wakanora 1.
So what was your job on the ship?
I was essentially the medical officer, not commissioned. The LSTs, the amphibious forces, had pharmacist mates that served as the medical personnel, and then if you had a very serious crisis of any kind, you would make contact with a ship that had a doctor, and they would make arrangements for the doctor to come aboard. But normal sick call and minor cuts and abrasions and minor surgery and that kind of thing, you were taught to do that at independent duty school.
Did you see any combat while you were?
Okinawa essentially was the worst one. We were on the tail end of the Battle of the Philippines, and then we went to Cebu City to pick up a flotilla that was going to Okinawa for the invasion there.
Do you have any memories from that?
You know, the most poignant thing that I remember was we left Naha Harbor and were taking Army personnel to Aishima, north of Okinawa, north of Naha, and we got there the day Ernie Pyle was killed. I don't know if you are familiar with Ernie Pyle, but he was a very prominent wartime correspondent and author who was from Indiana. And in fact, they have the big memorial stuff down there for him.
What kind of friendships and camaraderie did you form while you were serving, and with whom?
Oh, we had a kind of a three musketeers between the cook, who was the first class cook, and the chief boatswain's mate, and myself. We tended to go on these little excursions when we could get off the ship together and have a few drinks and carouse around together. The chief boatswain's mate was a Polish fellow by the name of Ed Ulatowski, and the chief cook was well, he wasn't the chief cook, he was the first class cook, was Johnny Gilmore, and the three of us kind of buddied around.
Did you stay in touch with them after the war?
No. They were, John was married, and he went off the ship. Well, Ed was the first one that got to come back from the South Pacific, and he was regular Navy, so he was staying in, and came back to some other assignment. I had no idea where. Gilmore was a reservist like myself, and he left. But the pharmacist mates were considered critical ratings, and we got hung up. We didn't get to, despite the point system, we didn't get to leave right away after the war.
So what was the point system?
Well, you had so many points for the time that you had served and how much time you'd been overseas, and when you could be released, when you could get discharged.
So did you stay in touch with your family and friends back home while you were
Oh
on
yeah,
your
oh yeah. We corresponded. Letters were not really frequent, but they tend to accumulate because a lot of times it was a waiting business, and you were just sailing South Pacific, and among other things, you spent your time writing letters.
So you said that it's a lot of waiting and a lot of writing letters.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a lot of time that there is no action whatsoever. It's all preparation, and you don't just jump in, boom, boom, you know. A lot of things took time because the country itself was originally not prepared to go to war, and it took several years for us to catch up and to even be combative.
So did you see, you said that you saw some combat, but when you weren't waiting, so when you were actually seeing the combat, can you describe any of those situations where your job changed to? Or
Oh, it's difficult to describe, and it's difficult to relive any kind of combat situation, but we sat at Naha Harbor on a ship, and the Japanese would send the flights in and break the barrier, like they were going to attack, make everybody go to GQ, General Quarters, and then they'd turn around and leave. And they kept that up for about 7 days, just aggravating, and not really attacking. And then when they did attack, the whole squad, the flotillas, everybody was firing guns and even trying to shoot down planes with pistols, ridiculous. Our ship had 50 millimeter anti-aircraft guns, but you would see guys out on the deck firing M1 rifles, trying to shoot planes down. But when they did attack, they threw quite a bit of armament in it. Of course, we were not in as precarious position as the Army and the Marines. The people that had the responsibility for land invasions, they took the bloody beatings. The Navy, except for torpedo scares and things like that, relatively safe.
So you said that you hung out with the other two fellas.
Mm-hmm.
What did you guys do for your recreation when you were off duty?
Well, we weren't off duty from the time. From the time we went into the South Pacific, there was, you were on duty. There wasn't any such thing as going out and having a good time. But occasionally, when the ship would be beached, loading or unloading cargo, and you'd have a few hours where you could get off of the ship and get onto an island like Guam or Enewetak, or the Navy had I guess the military in general had an R&R program that after so many months they would send you for a couple of days to the Ulysses, where they had a recreation facility, and you were provided with a couple cans of beer, and you could go over and it was all servicemen, just getting a little rowdy. But that was the kind of liberty you had. There was no such thing as overnight stuff until the war was over. And then during the occupation of Japan, when we were docked at Kobe or Wakanorawan or someplace like that, you could get off the ship for overnight. If you could find a place to stay, and usually you had to go back to the ship to sleep. That's one of the big regrets that I had was after the war, during the occupation, when there was so much to see in Japan, and I was too young to appreciate it. I missed going to the cultural things in Tokyo or seeing any of the. They had Hirohito's horses and all that stuff that you could go and see, you know. Too young. I'd go to the equivalent of a USO and play cards or something like that. Drink Pepsi Colas instead of experiencing.
Do you remember where you were on VE Day or VJ Day?
I think well, when the Japanese War ended, I was not too conscious of the German War or even what was happening there, the European theater. But when the Japanese were bombed with A-bomb, we were in the Philippines and getting ready to mass actual invasion of Japan. They were gathering the ships in and forming up the various flotilla to go into Japan for the invasion. So the bombs put a halt to that.
What was your reaction to hearing about the size of the bomb and the end of the war in general?
Didn't hear about it really fully for quite some time because it was pretty much shrouded in mystery. And it was really not realistic when you think back of the destruction, you know, that obliteration of a whole city. You can't get realistic about it without seeing it, and of course nobody was seeing it until quite some time after it had happened, except for the mushroom cloud.
So what was your reaction when you found out the war was over?
I was young. I didn't, I was confused about what I was going to do. I thought that I might want to go back and go to college. And fortunately that came to fruition with the GI Bill. And I was able to do that because my parents would certainly not have been able to afford it. But confusion, a lot of confusion, a lot of trouble adapting back to civilian life. I think we all had a certain amount of mental problems and, it was a case of moving from when we were totally cared for. I mean, we went into the service and everybody made decisions for us. We didn't make any decisions. And we just did what we were told. And all of a sudden you're you're thrown into a real life situation where you're responsible for yourself again, and it's an adjustment.
How were you received on coming back home by your family and friends? And
Very well, very well. Always in the United States, I think during World War II especially, we always had a hero's welcome. Not so with Vietnam, unfortunately, and not so much with Korea. But World War II, the country was extremely patriotic and extremely united. It's really almost criminal, the reception that the Vietnam people got when they got back.
you said that you were stationed in Japan after the war was over. How long?
Not stationed.
Oh.
I was in the occupation forces. The ships that brought repatriated Japanese back and were attempting to establish liaisons with Japan and the whole peacemaking process. To actually occupy the country, the Navy didn't do that. We took people in to do it.
So how long did it take you to get back to the United States after the war was over?
I don't remember the exact date that I was released, but it seemed to me like it was in September, but I'm not sure. But LSTs are slow boats, and it was kind of a lengthy journey to get back. I mean, maybe 2 weeks to get out of the South Pacific to San Francisco, and then transferred to Great Lakes and discharged. Probably took better part of 3 months, the whole processing before I finally got out.
How do you think your wartime and military experience affected your life?
Oh, it's difficult to say. It's my military service in the Navy was a matter of pride and patriotism, which was rampant in the community and in the country. Everybody felt that way. It's I suppose it taught me a certain amount of discipline, and a certain amount of respect for other people. My major benefit from that whole experience, of course, was being able to go to school and being able to go to college and have a career, which I would not have had without the war, horrible as it seems.
So how do you feel about the military now, and what are your feelings about the military in general?
I guess I still have pride in the country. I still have a strong patriotic feeling about the country. I still feel that that the military is a very essential part of the government. Uh, I don't think it hurts us to be strong at all. And my general feelings are favorable toward the military. I've been in the Legion for over 50 years, life member, and I wouldn't have done that if I didn't believe in it. And of course, I take great pride in my grandson, my granddaughter serving.
If there was one message that you would like to give to younger generations that would be held on through this interview, what would it be?
You know, not to be political, but one of the finest things that John Kennedy said was, ask not what you can do, not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I'm gonna get weepy here. When you come to the end of your life, yeah. When you come to the end of your life, you take satisfaction in your family.
Turn this off.